So while we're looking at this, I want to be thinking about what are some of the lessons that we can learn from looking at this music. First of all, I've already made this point. I think what can be perceived is always most important. I think when Bach puts something in a soprano, he knows it's the highest voice. It's going to stick out. Or if it's in a bass, it's going to have a certain kind of function. I don't think, looking at how Bach hid things inside of the texture is a very useful enterprise. It may be some stuff in there that's kind of fun to look at, but that wasn't what he or any great composer is about. Second point, make projects, make big problems. Well, that's one way for me to say, if you don't know what this is all about, Bach's project was to write a Prelude and Fugue in every major and minor key available in the 12-note well-tempered system that was available to him. And that kind of project opens up all sorts of ways of thinking that may not have been there if a composer hadn't started out with that kind of plan. Ideas must be strong, individual, and clear. I think sometimes we get so excited about the craft that the composer exerts on his ideas that sometimes we don't realize what actually is the most important thing, which is how good is the idea itself. And I think like looking at Bach fugue subjects, we can find that almost every one has something so unique, so exciting, so wonderful about it that we want to go ahead and listen to the rest of the piece. So just looking at the quality of an idea is maybe the first step that composers need to do when they start thinking about their music. Finding a variety of solutions. What I can see in Bach is that there's hardly ever one way of doing things. And if, as a composer, we come up with 4 or 5 different ways of doing things, then the next job is to figure out which of those things we should use. And if there's 3 or 4 we want to use, how do we order them? Where do we put them? How do we structure our piece using the possible variations of treating a certain idea? So that sort of leads me to the next point, arranging ideas by various measures of meaning. I think it's important to look at anything that can happen to an idea in a piece of music and decide what its function might be. And as I'm looking at Bach, I think he's an expert at doing that. The end run, injecting a new parameter. By that I mean that sometimes we as composers, we beat our heads against the wall trying to figure out how to get the right chord, when actually what's needed is the right rhythm, or not a chord at all, but a percussion instrument or something. And Bach does that kind of thing. Just whenever you think that he's going to use counterpoint or harmony or something to solve a problem, he dumps all of that and uses rhythm and a single line to get you where you want to go. Establishing defining qualities of a piece. I think what's great about all of these pieces, and even in the first book, we have 24 Preludes and Fugues, which make 48 pieces. And what's so amazing to me is, as limited maybe as this late Baroque common practice style might seem to be, they're all so uniquely different. And that's because I think there's a real definite compositional technique invested in trying to figure out what it is that makes this piece what it should be, and how do I handle the form, the range, the way I treat rhythm, the way I use information flow to get that piece to give the character that defines it. Functions of sections. That's something that I'm really fascinated by, is how, as listeners, we can listen to music and sort of know where we are in the piece. And I think this is something that it's about syntax. It's about recognizing what things are endings, what things are good beginnings, what things are taking us forward, what things are making statements that we want to sit and think about a little bit. And I think Bach is very good at using the material that he constructs to signal to your perception how you should be listening to it. Should you be thinking about this as the main stuff, or should you be thinking about this as secondary material? Controlling time through information idle. Well, I'm very interested in the whole idea of information, and how many things are redundant that keep repeating, that you can sort of get in a groove and go with the groove, and what things change to get that groove either moving in different directions or sometimes skipping right out of it into some other groove. And how sometimes the most important thing a composer can do is to find a way to slow down the information, to make you wait, to give you a sense that the next thing that's going to happen is really important, and you better get your mind refreshed before it hits you. Silence is golden, and rests especially. And I'm a big fan of rests. I love fugue subjects that start with one note and then have a whole bunch of rests. Those kind of things, and the way Bach uses rests and the way the texture changes is, I think, the thing we really have to observe as composers, because I think that's a mistake a lot of us make in our own compositions, is not understanding how important silence and windows in the texture can be. So that kind of goes along with the use for concentration and expansions. That's a little more sense of the information organization, that sometimes things have to be telescoped in, sometimes they have to be expanded outward, just to give you the right sort of sense of where the listener's sense of flow happens to be at that time. We'll be looking at how range, texture, repetition, pitch relationships, things I think that people who are tone deaf and maybe have never had a music lesson in their life can still hear. Because I think sometimes we miss the most important things that give a piece its architecture. And beyond that, its emotional impact. And a lot of those things are things that everybody should be, at least we hope that people can recognize when we're repeating something or when we get to our highest note. One thing I should say about range, I think this might be the best place to say it, is in this particular set of pieces, the Well-Tempered Clavier, Bach's keyboard bottomed out at low C and topped out at high C, 4 octaves. Middle C, 2 octaves below middle C, 2 octaves above middle C. And knowing that, and having that sort of as your structure, makes the range much more exciting to me than pieces which go all over the piano, because I never really know, how high is that note, or how low is this note. But when I hear this in Bach, that's the top note. And that's something that I find particularly exciting, or knowing that he's going down there. We'll talk about that some more. Counterpoint, obviously, is something to be looked at from lots of different angles, and I'm sure that will be coming up in a lot of these pieces as we look at them. The uses for grit. Sometimes I think music just has to have some dirty stuff in it, some things that just sort of, little wake-up calls. If it gets too pretty or gets too smooth or ideal sounding, I think it loses its humanity. And I think Bach was very much aware of just sometimes putting things in just to give you that little bit of grit. Serendipity maybe comes along the same lines, although it's a different kind of grit. Serendipity is more like something that doesn't really make a lot of sense, just to sort of give us a sort of context for the things that do make a lot of sense. So those are, that's a list of some of the lessons that will be coming up. Okay, so now we're ready to jump right in.